He thought he was stopping a woman with an expensive car. He had no idea he was standing in front of someone who had spent her life judging the very system he represented. The afternoon sun reflected across the polished surface of a silver Rolls-Royce as it moved quietly through the streets of Washington, D.C. To most people passing by, it was simply a luxury vehicle. But to Officer Brandon Mitchell, it became the first detail he noticed. Before he knew the person behind the wheel, before he understood the story behind the driver, he had already formed an opinion. Inside the vehicle was Dr. Evelyn Carter, a woman who had built her entire life around discipline, fairness, and responsibility. She was not someone who searched for attention. She did not measure her worth by the car she drove or the recognition she received. To Evelyn, success was not about displaying achievements. It was about using every opportunity to serve others with integrity. Yet from the outside, people often saw only what was visible. They saw the Rolls-Royce. They saw a black woman behind the wheel. They saw a moment without knowing the decades of dedication that created it. Officer Brandon Mitchell had spent years working in law enforcement. He believed experience helped him understand situations quickly. He valued awareness, confidence, and the ability to make decisions when circumstances changed. But over time, that confidence had also created a habit. He sometimes trusted his first impression before searching for the complete story. That afternoon, he saw a vehicle that represented wealth and a driver he believed he could immediately understand. What he did not see were the years Evelyn spent studying the law, serving communities, and carrying responsibilities that most people would never know. He did not know that the woman sitting calmly behind the steering wheel was not someone trying to appear important. She was someone who had already earned respect through a lifetime of work. Evelyn noticed the way people sometimes reacted to what they saw before they understood what was real. She had experienced moments when assumptions arrived faster than facts. But she had learned something powerful throughout her journey. A person's dignity does not depend on someone else's ability to recognize it. She remained calm because she knew exactly who she was. She did not need to announce her accomplishments. She did not need to prove her value in a single conversation. Meanwhile, Brandon believed he was simply handling another ordinary situation. He had no idea this moment would challenge the way he viewed authority, appearance, and fairness. He did not know that the woman in the Rolls-Royce carried a title connected to the very foundation of justice. He did not know that one day, he would remember this encounter not because of the car, but because of the lesson it revealed. Sometimes the biggest mistakes happen when people believe they already know the whole story. And sometimes the person who appears to need no introduction is the person whose story changes everything. The moment Officer Brandon Mitchell approached the luxury vehicle, he believed he was looking at a situation he already understood. To him, the details seemed simple. A high-end Rolls-Royce, a quiet street, a black woman behind the wheel. But what appeared simple from the outside was actually a story built on years of dedication, achievement, and responsibility. Dr. Evelyn Carter remained composed because she had spent her entire life learning that patience often revealed more than quick reactions ever could. She understood that people sometimes made decisions based on incomplete information. She knew that a person could be judged before their experiences, their character, or their true responsibilities were ever known. That knowledge shaped the way she carried herself. She did not allow assumptions from others to determine her confidence. She had faced difficult moments before, and each one taught her the same lesson. Dignity comes from within. Brandon, however, continued relying on his first impression. His years in law enforcement had trained him to notice details quickly. He believed that experience allowed him to recognize situations before they developed. But there was something different about this encounter. The woman standing before him did not react the way he expected. She did not become defensive. She did not attempt to use status or appearance to influence the conversation. Instead, she remained respectful and calm. That response made Brandon pause. Throughout his career, he had met many different people, but Evelyn carried herself with a level of confidence that did not come from seeking approval. It came from knowing exactly who she was. What Brandon did not know was that Evelyn's relationship with justice went far beyond this single moment. Long before she ever sat behind the wheel of that Rolls-Royce, She had dedicated years to understanding the law and protecting the principles that guided society. Her journey was not built on wealth or recognition. It was built on discipline, education, and a commitment to fairness. She had spent countless hours studying, preparing, and serving others. Yet none of that was visible from a passing glance. Brandon saw a vehicle. He saw a person. But he did not yet see the entire story. Evelyn understood that revealing every achievement was not necessary. A person's value did not increase because others finally discovered it. The truth remained the truth whether people recognized it immediately or not. As the interaction continued, something subtle began changing. Brandon started noticing that his assumptions did not fully match the reality in front of him. The confidence he expected from someone trying to prove importance was missing. Instead, he saw humility. The authority he expected to be displayed openly was hidden behind kindness and patience. That contrast stayed with him. He began wondering who this woman really was and why she carried herself with such remarkable calm. He still did not know that the person he was questioning was connected to the very system of justice he represented every day. He still did not understand that this ordinary-looking encounter would soon become a lesson about judgment, respect, and the danger of believing you know someone before you know their story. The conversation between Officer Brandon Mitchell and Dr. Evelyn Carter continued, but the balance of the moment was beginning to change in ways Brandon did not expect. He was still focused on the situation in front of him, but he started noticing something that challenged his original assumptions. Evelyn was not trying to impress him. She was not trying to make herself appear important. She simply carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years understanding the difference between influence and attention. For Evelyn, respect was never something demanded through a title or displayed through possessions. It was something built through actions, choices, and the way a person treated others when there was nothing to gain. Long before this afternoon, Evelyn had learned that people often noticed the results of success without understanding the journey behind it. They saw the finished picture but rarely saw the years of effort that created it. They saw the professional title but not the countless hours of preparation. They saw the luxury vehicle but not the personal sacrifices and dedication that came before it. Evelyn understood this because her own journey had been filled with moments where people underestimated what they could not immediately see. Her path to becoming a judge was not created overnight. It required determination, discipline, and a commitment to fairness that guided every decision she made. She had spent years studying the law, listening to different perspectives, and learning that every person who entered a courtroom carried a story beyond the facts presented in front of them. That experience shaped the way she viewed people everywhere, including during unexpected encounters like this one. Meanwhile, Brandon began reflecting on his own approach. He had always believed that quick judgment was a necessary skill. In many situations, making decisions quickly mattered. But this encounter was teaching him that speed without understanding could create mistakes. A person could notice details and still miss the truth. A person could have experience and still have more to learn. The calm woman standing before him represented a lesson he had not expected to receive. Evelyn noticed that Brandon's attitude was slowly changing. She did not celebrate it. She did not point it out. She simply allowed the moment to continue naturally. She believed that real understanding could not be forced. It had to come from a person's willingness to look beyond their first impression. The more Brandon observed her, the more he realized that her confidence came from a place deeper than wealth or status. Came from knowing her purpose. It came from years of carrying responsibilities that most people never saw. As the afternoon continued, small details began connecting together. The way Evelyn spoke, the way she listened, the way she remained respectful even when she could have easily focused on defending herself. Every detail suggested there was a much larger story behind this encounter. Brandon still did not know the full truth about the woman in front of him. He did not know her position, her history, or the impact she had made through her work. But he was beginning to understand one important lesson. The person who appears ordinary may be carrying a life story far greater than anyone expects. As the afternoon continued, Officer Brandon Mitchell found himself thinking about the encounter in a way he had not expected. The situation looked simple from the beginning, But the more he observed Dr. Evelyn Carter, the more he realized that simple appearances could hide complicated truths. He had approached the moment believing he understood what he was seeing. Now, he was beginning to question whether his first impression had been accurate. Evelyn remained calm because she understood something that many people learned only after years of experience. A person's true value is not determined by what others notice first. She had never measured success through possessions, attention, or the opinions of strangers. The Rolls-Royce was only a vehicle. The title she carried was only a responsibility. What truly defined her was the discipline, fairness, and compassion she brought into every decision she made. Brandon did not know that Evelyn had spent years inside the world of law, studying not only rules and procedures, but also the human stories behind every case. She understood that justice was not simply about facts written on paper. It was about recognizing that every person had a background, a struggle, and a reason behind the choices they made. That understanding shaped her approach as a judge and as a person. She believed that authority without empathy was incomplete. Meanwhile, Brandon began noticing the difference between someone who wanted power and someone who carried responsibility. Evelyn never tried to dominate the conversation. She never attempted to use her position as a shield. Instead, she showed patience and allowed her actions to speak louder than any introduction could. That was what stayed in Brandon's mind. He had expected confidence to appear through status or control, but Evelyn showed a different kind of confidence. It was quiet. It was steady. It came from knowing she had nothing to prove. As the interaction continued, Brandon started reflecting on the many people he had encountered throughout his career. He wondered how many stories he had never discovered because he believed he already understood the situation. He realized that every person had details hidden beneath the surface, and sometimes the most important details were the ones that were easiest to overlook. Evelyn noticed the change in his behavior. She could sense that he was becoming more thoughtful, but she did not seek an apology or recognition. She believed the purpose of justice was not to create humiliation. The purpose was to create understanding and accountability. Her actions showed the same principle she followed throughout her life. People should be judged by the choices they make, not by assumptions created before the truth is known. Brandon still did not know the full identity of the woman standing in front of him. He did not know the level of responsibility she carried or the respect she had earned through years of service. But something had already changed. He was no longer looking at a person behind the wheel of an expensive car. He was looking at someone whose story was far greater than what he first imagined. And soon, the hidden truth about Dr. Evelyn Carter would reveal why this ordinary encounter was about to become a lesson in justice, humility, and the danger of judging a person before knowing their story. The afternoon sun continued moving across the city streets, but the meaning of the encounter between Officer Brandon Mitchell and Dr. Evelyn Carter had already begun to change. What started as a moment shaped by assumptions was slowly becoming a lesson about perception, responsibility, and the importance of seeing beyond appearances. Brandon still did not know the complete story behind the woman standing before him, but he could no longer ignore the feeling that there was something much deeper beneath the surface. Evelyn remained composed because she understood that truth did not need to compete for attention. It simply needed time to be revealed. She had spent years building a career where every decision required patience, fairness, and careful consideration. As a judge, she knew that people often arrived with only pieces of a larger story. A single moment rarely showed the full picture. That understanding influenced not only how she approached the courtroom, but also how she approached everyday life. She knew that every person deserved to be seen as more than an assumption. Brandon began noticing the qualities that made Evelyn different. Her calm voice, her careful words, her refusal to turn the moment into a personal confrontation. These details challenged the way he normally viewed difficult interactions. He had always believed that authority came from confidence and the ability to take control of situations. But Evelyn showed him another perspective. True authority was not about making others feel small. It was about carrying responsibility with wisdom and restraint. The contrast between them became clearer. Brandon represented a person who relied heavily on what he could immediately observe. Evelyn represented someone who understood that the most important truths were often hidden beneath the surface. Neither of them knew how significant this moment would become, but the difference in their perspectives was already creating a shift. As more details about Evelyn's background slowly became known, the people around the situation began to recognize that this was not simply an encounter involving a luxury vehicle. It was an encounter involving a person whose professional life centered around justice itself. The discovery did not change who Evelyn was. She had been the same person from the beginning. The only thing that changed was that others were finally seeing what had always been there. Brandon felt a quiet realization growing inside him. He had spent years believing that experience allowed him to understand people quickly, but this moment showed him that experience also required humility. The ability to make decisions was important, but the ability to reconsider those decisions was equally valuable. Evelyn watched the situation unfold without seeking attention or recognition. She did not need anyone to know her title before she deserved respect. She believed respect should be given because every person had value, not because of their position. As the truth about her identity moved closer to being revealed, Brandon faced a difficult realization. The person he thought he was evaluating was actually someone whose life represented the very principles he was expected to protect. The Rolls-Royce was never the important detail. The title was never the most important detail either. The most important detail was the person behind them. And soon, Brandon would discover that the woman he underestimated was not just someone with success. She was someone who carried the meaning of justice every day. The truth about Dr. Evelyn Carter was getting closer to the surface, but the most important part of the moment was not the title she carried. It was the lesson hidden behind it. Officer Brandon Mitchell had spent years believing that experience allowed him to understand situations quickly. He believed that noticing details, reading behavior, and making decisions were the foundations of good judgment. But standing in front of Evelyn, he began to understand that judgment without complete understanding could lead people in the wrong direction. Evelyn remained exactly the same person she had been from the beginning. The discovery of her identity did not change her confidence because her confidence had never depended on recognition. She did not need a title to deserve respect. She did not need a reputation to prove her value. She carried herself with the same patience and dignity, whether people knew her achievements or not. That was what made the moment so powerful. Brandon began realizing that the woman he initially viewed through a narrow perspective was someone who represented the principles he believed he was protecting. Evelyn's work as a judge required her to look beyond appearances every day. She understood that a person could not be defined by a single event, a single mistake, or a single assumption. Every individual carried a history that shaped who they became. She had spent years listening to different stories, considering different perspectives, and understanding that fairness required more than simply following a process. It required compassion and awareness. As Brandon reflected on the encounter, he started thinking about how many times people are misunderstood because others only see one small part of their lives. He thought about how quickly assumptions could form and how difficult it could be to recognize them once they existed. This moment challenged him because it was not about a car or a conversation. It was about the way people choose to see one another. The details surrounding Evelyn began receiving more attention, and the reality of who she was became clearer. She was not simply someone with an expensive vehicle. She was a respected legal professional whose decisions affected lives and whose career was built around fairness. Yet even with that knowledge, Evelyn never changed her approach. She did not seek to embarrass Brandon. She did not use the situation as an opportunity to display power. Instead, she continued showing the same qualities that defined her from the beginning. Her strength came from restraint. Her confidence came from preparation. Her influence came from the trust she had built over many years. Brandon felt a deeper realization forming. The badge he wore represented responsibility, but responsibility required more than authority. It required awareness. It required the ability to recognize when someone deserved to be heard instead of quickly judged. The woman standing before him had not gained importance because people finally discovered her identity. She had always carried that importance. The only difference was that others were beginning to see it. And as the truth continued unfolding, Brandon was forced to confront a question he had avoided. How many people had he misunderstood because he believed he already knew their story? The moment when the truth about Dr. Evelyn Carter became known was not a moment of celebration for her. It was not a moment where she wanted attention, recognition, or a chance to prove that she had been underestimated. For Evelyn, the most important part was never revealing who she was. The most important part was showing that every person deserved to be treated with fairness before their background was known. Officer Brandon Mitchell stood in the middle of a situation that now looked completely different from how it began. The woman he first viewed through assumptions was not someone trying to appear important. She was someone whose entire career was built around understanding people, evaluating facts, and making decisions based on fairness rather than appearances. Brandon began to understand that the biggest mistake was not failing to recognize Evelyn's title. The bigger mistake was believing that a person's value depended on whether others recognized it. Evelyn had carried the same dignity from the first moment. The difference was that Brandon was finally seeing what had always been there. As information about Evelyn's professional background became clearer, the atmosphere around the encounter changed. People who learned who she was understood that this was not an ordinary interaction. She was not simply a successful individual driving a luxury vehicle. She was a judge whose work represented the principles of justice and accountability. Yet Evelyn did not use that position to make herself seem above anyone else. She continued speaking with the same calm and respect she had shown before. That was the part Brandon found most difficult to ignore. He expected authority to appear through status, confidence, or control. Instead, he witnessed authority expressed through patience and humility. The experience forced him to rethink what power truly meant. A title could create recognition, but character created respect. Position could create influence, but responsibility determined how that influence was used. Brandon reflected on his own understanding of his role. He realized that wearing a badge came with an obligation to look beyond the obvious. It required more than following procedures. It required recognizing the humanity of every person involved in a situation. Evelyn's presence became a reminder that people are always more than the first impression they create. The Rolls-Royce had captured his attention, but it had never represented the most important part of the story. The important part was the person inside the vehicle. The years of preparation, the dedication, the commitment to fairness. As the encounter moved toward its conclusion, Brandon understood that he had experienced something rare. He had been given an opportunity to learn before a mistake became permanent. Evelyn did not need to destroy his confidence to teach him a lesson. She simply allowed the truth to reveal itself. That was the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge seeks to make someone feel the same pain. Justice seeks to create understanding and accountability. And in that moment, Brandon learned a lesson that would remain with him long after the conversation ended. The people we understand the least are often the people whose stories we have never taken the time to discover. The encounter between Officer Brandon Mitchell and Dr. Evelyn Carter continued to stay in Brandon's mind long after the initial assumptions had faded away. What he experienced was not simply a conversation with a stranger. It became a moment that challenged the way he viewed people, authority, and responsibility. He had spent years believing that confidence came from knowing what to do quickly. But Evelyn showed him that true confidence also came from knowing when to slow down, listen, and understand. Evelyn never looked at the situation as an opportunity to prove she was more important than anyone else. She did not believe a person's position should determine whether they deserved respect. In her eyes, respect was the starting point, not a reward given after someone discovered your accomplishments. That belief was one of the reasons she had become the person she was. Throughout her career as a judge, Evelyn had witnessed countless situations where people were reduced to a single moment. She knew how easy it was for assumptions to replace understanding. She knew how quickly a person could be judged without anyone knowing the challenges they had overcome or the responsibilities they carried. Those experiences shaped the way she approached everyone, including Brandon. She understood that mistakes were often corrected not through humiliation, but through reflection and accountability. Brandon began seeing the encounter through a different perspective. The badge he wore represented authority, but authority was never meant to remove the need for compassion. A position could give someone the ability to make decisions, but it could not guarantee that every decision was correct. True professionalism required the courage to examine yourself and recognize when you needed to grow. The realization was difficult, but it was also necessary. As the details of Evelyn's identity became fully understood, Brandon faced the reality that the person he had judged so quickly was someone who had dedicated her life to fairness. The irony was impossible to ignore. He had looked at her and made assumptions, while her entire career had been built around the responsibility of looking beyond assumptions. Evelyn represented the very principle he needed to remember. Every person deserved to be considered as a complete human being, not as a collection of appearances or expectations. What surprised Brandon most was that Evelyn did not use the moment to make him feel powerless. She used it as a chance for understanding. She showed that having authority did not mean needing to display it. The strongest people often carry the greatest responsibilities quietly. As the situation came to a close, Brandon realized that the lesson would remain with him. The luxury vehicle was never the important detail. The title was never the most important detail. The important detail was the character of the person behind them. Evelyn had shown that justice was not only found inside courtrooms. It was found in everyday choices, in moments, when people decided whether they would judge quickly or seek the truth. Brandon walked away with a different understanding of the badge he carried. He learned that power without humility could create distance, but responsibility combined with respect could create trust. And the woman he once viewed through a simple assumption became the person who reminded him what justice was truly supposed to represent. The day that began with a simple misunderstanding ended with a lesson that neither Officer Brandon Mitchell nor Dr. Evelyn Carter would forget. What appeared to be a brief encounter on a city street became a powerful reminder that every person carries a story beyond what others can immediately see. Brandon returned to his responsibilities with a different perspective. He still wore the same badge, but he no longer viewed his role in the same way. He understood that authority was not about being the first person to make a judgment. It was about being responsible enough to seek the truth before reaching a conclusion. The experience with Evelyn changed the way he approached every person he met afterward. He began remembering that a vehicle, a profession, or an appearance could never explain an entire human being. Evelyn continued living her life with the same principles that guided her before that day. She never considered the encounter a victory. She never believed that revealing her position was the important part of the story. To her, the true lesson was much bigger. People should not have to reveal their achievements before they are treated with dignity. Respect should not depend on someone's title, income, or social position. It should exist because every person has value. Her years as a judge had taught her that justice was not only about decisions made inside a courtroom. Justice was also found in everyday interactions, in moments when people chose patience over assumptions and understanding over judgment. Brandon thought deeply about the irony of what happened. He had looked at Evelyn and believed he understood the situation because of what he saw. But Evelyn's entire career had been dedicated to looking beyond what was visible. She had built her life around the idea that facts mattered more than assumptions. She understood that people could be misunderstood when others only noticed one small part of their story. That afternoon became a reminder that everyone deserves the chance to be seen completely. The Rolls-Royce that first caught Brandon's attention was never the important detail. It was only a symbol of how easily people can focus on the surface and miss the person underneath. The real story was about dedication, discipline, and the quiet strength of someone who never needed to announce her importance. Brandon learned that a badge could represent responsibility, but it could never replace wisdom. A position could provide authority, but character determined how that authority was used. Evelyn showed him that the strongest form of influence did not come from making others feel small. It came from creating moments where people could learn, reflect, and become better. Years later, the memory of that encounter would remain with Brandon because it changed the way he understood his own responsibility. He learned that every person he met had a story he could not immediately see. And Evelyn continued forward, carrying the same dignity she had shown from the beginning. In the end, the lesson was simple. The greatest mistake is believing you already know someone before you have taken the time to understand them. Because true justice does not begin with judgment. It begins with seeing the person standing in front of you.